Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Very happy to have you here. Today we're going to be talking politics with David Harrison. Before we do, though, I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for being a sponsor of the Bainbridge Island Senior and Community Center. Fieldstone offers assisted independent living and memory care. They're located up on Rolling Bay, and they have a lovely campus up there. They'd love to show you around. They also offer day stay and respite programs, and they would be happy to treat you to lunch or dinner if you want to stop by for a visit. Call Randy O'Neill or Sierra Wood. The phone number is 206-594-1010. The website is fieldstonecommunities.com. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on these waters and adjacent lands of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship. David, thank you very much for showing up. I guess you're calling in remotely today. We don't have a lot of folks here because I think we have an internet outage here on the south, or at least the middle part of Bainbridge Island. But we'll send them the link, and they can hear your news about the way the world is operating. Thank you for your monthly visits.
As you said, Reed, we had 100 hits last month, so that's a good thing. So we'll keep those 100 people in mind as we give our presentation today. Before, as those of you who've followed Reed's newsletter know, we're going to talk a little bit about the mysterious Supreme Court and a little bit about Congress in the context of the upcoming potential closing of the government, and then we'll end with a little exchange on the 2026 elections. But before I do, the other day there was something that we haven't seen lately, and it was some Republican senators excoriating a cabinet member. So I thought I would mention how it could happen that Bill Cassidy, who after all made possible the successful nomination of Bobby Kennedy and John Barrasso, who's nobody's moderate, could end up castigating the HHS secretary in front of the world. It is because it's just the idea of it made me drop my computer. Bobby Kennedy's a special case. He's not a bro of Trump and never will be. He was a marriage of convenience. Trump thought he was a little bit ahead and thought it would help him with a certain very small but meaningful contingent if he had Kennedy as HHS secretary, and that's what it took to get him supporting Trump. And it's interesting because that may actually have been enough, because Kennedy has his own following. It's interesting because when I first started following him, he was one of the founders of Riverkeepers. He had worked on the Hudson River and was a very influential environmentalist before he drank the anti-vax Kool-Aid. The interesting thing to know, though, is although Trump loves anything named Kennedy, he's not a bro. Trump would never allow a bunch of senators to do to Kennedy. We wouldn't allow that, say, with Hegseth. Kennedy's a Hessian. That's what he is. He's King George's third Hessians, and the Hessians were dispensable. And at a certain point, so is Kennedy if he becomes a political liability. The other thing that's going on here, of course, is Trump has successfully for some time been both a vaxxer and an anti-vaxxer. I think only Trump could possibly do that. But in point of fact, he's still proud to have been behind Operation Warp Speed that got us the vaccine. And docs saved his life. He could have died. On the other hand, he's happy to be an anti-vaxxer when it suits him. I would say this, the one thing that is the greatest political danger of any elected official, as Biden proved, is inflation, because people form their own view on whether they're facing it. So whatever the elected official can say, well, it's going down or it's somebody else's fault. But what the voter knows is how much the price of eggs is. So, so the thing about inflation is it could kill you, and Trump knows that, and he's playing with fire in that with regard to tariffs. Another thing that could kill you, but it's a little harder, is anti-vax politics, because the press loves illness and mortality stories, and they're veterans at it since we just had a pandemic. So if it turns out that this winter that the incidence of COVID and the incidence of COVID deaths goes up significantly, the press will be all over that. And my son was saying, Dad, it doesn't matter because MAGA believes anything that Trump wants him to believe. I'm not talking about MAGA. I'm talking about the MAGA's maybe a 35% thing, or you might give it a 38% thing, but it's not a 50% thing. And to make a long story short, the reason why Trump winked when Cassidy and Barrasso took off on Kennedy is they don't mind having within their house some pro-vaxxers, and they will continue actually to be on both sides to the extent they can get away with it, which provably in America so far they can. You would have thought, after he lost 1 million people, that wouldn't be possible. But America, in the age of disintermediation, where there's not any single trusted source of what the truth is, and the prevaricator is Donald Trump, anything is possible. I'll stop there for a second. Anything anybody want to say about? Is there anything anybody wants to say about Cassidy and Barrasso? I will say that Cassidy, having spent a medical lifetime supporting vaccines, when he looks in the mirror every morning, he knows that he was the vote that caused Kennedy's successful nomination. Can you imagine having to live with that? So
is Kennedy going to go?
No, I don't think so. Not until something makes him a liability. What makes him not so much a liability as you would think is they're already a party that's reconciled somehow the language of vaccination and anti-vaccination. So Bobby Kennedy said the vaccine killed more people than COVID did, which is not true, not even close to true. And then Bill Cassidy said, well, do you support Donald Trump's nomination for the Nobel Prize because of Operation Warp Speed? And Kennedy said yes. So right now they can have it both ways, and Kennedy has support within the party. I'm just reminding you that even people that Trump once loved are dispensable, but people who are extra dispensable are people that Trump didn't love in the first place. It was a marriage of convenience, and they don't pal around with each other.
So I'm just going to ask one other question, David, if I might, which is, we saw the Western States Health Alliance form this week, and then we saw Florida declare that they were not going to require any vaccines. So a lot more chaos on the forefront in terms of healthcare and vaccines, probably, right?
Well, I think so, and I was reading about the Health Alliance, and apparently states have considerable leeway. On the other hand, when you have a government that funds both Medicare and Medicaid, they're off really powerful in the world of vaccines and vaccine recommendations. So I wouldn't make light of the mayhem they could cause. I don't think they necessarily want to. I think the news story for them would be that the best news story for Trump would be that getting your COVID is entirely voluntary, that it's recommended for seniors and people with major conditions, and that it's entirely voluntary and it's available at your Walgreens and CVS. So I don't think the present story is so great. It is if you think Trump is invincible, but clearly he's not. If we had the election today, we'd take over the House and pick up a couple Senate seats. So I'm not with the moderates and the liberals and progressives who say that this is the abyss. My blog came out yesterday, and it's rules for understanding getting out of something that you think might be an abyss that's not really an abyss. This is a cyclical thing where we extended the cycle for 4 years by maniacal, absurd behavior. Trump's election was not inevitable, and he doesn't hold the majority on any major public issue facing America. So maybe immigration. Let's deal with the budget battle first. Trump just did a pocket rescission of $5 billion of foreign aid money. It's interesting. The point Susan Collins makes is the Congress rescinds money within the appropriations year all the time. The problem with the pocket rescission, basically, rescissions when you remove money from this year's appropriation, the fiscal year that ends in September 30th, are subject to the Budget and Impoundment Act that was passed after Nixon did rescissions. Under that scenario, what we just had with NPR, and some foreign aid, where Congress has to vote and approve the rescissions by a majority vote. And so instead of doing that, they did what's called a pocket rescission, where Congress doesn't have the expiration of the rescission vote is after the fiscal year ends. Susan Collins is very angry because this, of course, mocks the role of Congress in the appropriations process. So you could say, given that Trump needs to pass a budget on September 30th, why would he make Collins, Barkowski, Thune, and a bunch of other Republicans angry, to say nothing for the Democrats who are trying to negotiate things with Thune and Mike Johnson? Well, because Trump did it because he can, and the whole theory of the alleged art of the alleged deal is you take the most extreme position that you can take. So ultimately, if you settle the issue, the settlement will be more in your direction than it otherwise would be. That's what he's doing with the pocket rescission. He doesn't care if he's annoying Susan Collins. He might like that. He doesn't care if it unsettles Congress. All he wonders is what the deal will be on September 30th. We have a further dilemma. Last time this happened, as you may remember, Charles Schumer cast the deciding vote to pass the continuing resolution, with all other Democrats voting against it. The reason he did that is he's worried about the politics of who closes the government. Back when Republicans said to Joe Biden, or before him Barack Obama, before him Clinton, we're going to close the government, they didn't want to close the government. So whatever the Republicans were selling, there was a negotiation to be had. In this case, right now, Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer are saying to Trump, you know what? We're necessary. They're certainly saying it to Mike Johnson. You know what? You can't pass this continuing resolution without us. You need it to keep the government open. What do you think Donald Trump's saying? Oh my God, please, please negotiate with Schumer and Johnson. I mean, Schumer and Jeffries, so we can keep the government open. He's saying, all right, we'll close it for a while. So we have to think about what our position will be. In an America where everybody understands what baloney this is, voters would say, except this is a scam because Trump is rescinding money illegally, freezing things, not spending money. Therefore, the Democrats have to have this position. The Democrats are right. We won't punish them for closing the government, and we'll understand exactly what Hakeem Jeffries is demanding. However, this isn't that world. This is a world where people have a binary view of this. Is the government open or is the government closed? And having a position that caused the closure of the government is a non-trivial matter for Schumer and Jeffries. So they'll end up settling for a little less than they otherwise would. And they will provide, like Johnson, the votes, because he is not going to be able to do a big, beautiful bill vote and get his own votes. He needs some Democratic votes. They'll give them to him with some provisos over rescissions and this or that spending level. And the only thing they have on their side is the market doesn't like closures. We're back to the same old Trump management strategy that Democrats have used in the past. All it takes is the market to go down 5%, which it would ultimately over the closing of the government, worry about our credit rating and all those things, worry about Social Security payments. And that's what it takes to get a deal done. And if Schumer and Jeffries didn't have that factor, we would stay closed till Christmas and just do vital services and defense. You can't make Trump keep the government open because of traditional Democratic Party values. So it's not as easy as it seems, and Donald Trump will eventually be part of a deal, but Democrats want it to be a little bit different than it is, and we're just lucky we have the issue of market disapproval, because if we didn't have that, the passage of the budget in September 30 would be an awful exercise. So I'll stop there for a minute and we'll see what people think about all that. I would say there is, the closer you get to the election, the more teeny tiny slippage you'll get in Republican discipline because that's the way elections behave. So in the olden days, if it was Joe Biden, he would release a senator from, unless you really had to have a vote, you would release a senator. And that's why Murkowski had to vote for the big beautiful bill, because they wouldn't release her. They would kill her, metaphorically. So that's not the way it works now. Trump's not into releasing Republicans from anything. He'll threaten his friends with a primary, like he did Bill Cassidy. So it's a scary thing for them. Given that, however, there's still a little slippage. What happened the other day on Blue Slips is everything you need to know about slippage. Trump went on Truth Social, quotation marks around Truth and Social, and excoriated the 91-year-old Charles Grassley for honoring Blue Slips, which is how Democratic senators slow the district court judge nomination process. And notice Charles Grassley didn't change anything. He doesn't need to. He's 91. So what's happening is the Republicans are going to do a package that expedites approval of certain Trump nominees. And it's nothing like what Trump wants. It's a version of what Amy Klobuchar proposed when the shoe was on the other foot. So that's a sign of a little distance. and that'll happen more and more. People will, especially in the House, will have to peel off a little bit. It's still the most discipline that we have ever had a party show in modern times, and the highest level of retribution that is conceivable in the US government. When you only have a 3-4 vote advantage, you better have some discipline. But the discipline where you would take somebody who is in every way on your side and execute them is something new, and they're still having trouble getting used to it. Just happened to Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis wanted to say some things about the big beautiful bill, and they didn't want to hear from Tom Tillis about what he thought about Medicaid cuts. And they said, you know, vote our way or we'll primary you. And Tom Tillis fell on the sword. So that you notice the level of courage increases the closer you're getting to not serving anymore. And that's been the case since Bob Croker of Tennessee took on Trump in 2016. So I'll stop about the legislative process, continuing resolution, questions, thoughts, and concerns.
Are any,
Sheila Kerwin.
are any of the, I keep watching these town halls in various places like Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I have my friends who, I have my peeps in Wisconsin, and they say it's really quite amazing, the reaction to the Republicans in Wisconsin, for example. I mean, I'm talking about the town halls, and they're chaotic at the best.
Well, Democrats are trying to make them chaotic, so it's hard to read whether that's some big change in sentiment or not. I'm not saying it's not a change in some sentiment, and I was going to say later that in special elections, you have the legislature across the country, we're running 15 points ahead of where we should be, including the recent state Senate election in Iowa.
Yep.
So there is something out there. There's data that says a quarter of the Latinos who voted for Trump have regrets. So I'm not saying there isn't something, but I don't think you could tell by the amount of disorder in a town hall, because it pays opponents to show up and raise hell. I'm just
So
saying.
I have a question. I have a question about the blowback that Schumer and Jeffries experienced last time from the left wing of the Democratic Party. Are they likely to get more protection this time, or is it going to signal, the so-called Democratic disarray that is written about ad nauseum right now?
Well, I think the Democratic disarray is definitely overstated. I don't, in some primaries, you'll have, this is going to be the case, I think, in Maine, you'll have the Bernie candidate, progressive candidates, and you'll have people who might be liberals. They're not Joe Manchin moderates, any of them, I don't think, except maybe our dear Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who we would like to have win no matter what. Yeah, there'll be disarray, but what are they going to do to Schumer, and they're certainly not going to do anything to Hakeem Jeffries. So if they keep the government open and they get a little bit of a deal with some concessions from Mike Johnson and Thune, Democrats will get over it. During this election season, progressives will try and make her caucus a bit more progressive, and liberals will try and make it not. But so far, that's been within the bounds of what Democrats do with and to Democrats and have forever. I don't think it's a big thing. It's not like Bernie's going to run for president in the future. And just like Trump is MAGA, I don't know who the leader is of progressives except Bernie. I guess maybe a bit AOC, but I think the line between liberals and progressives is hard to define in the first place. Used to be, maybe it was the difference between our huge expansion of Medicaid and healthcare and, Medicaid, Medicare for all. Maybe that's the distinction, but Frances, if she's still on, might disagree with me. She might have some more to contribute on that, but I don't think, in answer to your question, we're not going to be in February of next year and have people say, well, I'm running because Hakeem Jeffries helped pass a continuing resolution. That's not going to happen. They want the government to be open too.
What about Pete? What about Pete?
Buttigieg?
Yes.
I keep bringing it up because I just like this guy.
Well, I'll get to a section about the 226.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Can I?
He's not going to be our, Sheila, you need to change to Brashear or something, because Pete's not going to run for president, be our presidential candidate in 2028. For one thing, the special delight of being transportation secretary means you get, hazardous waste trail derailment. How much film do you think the Republican Party has in the can blaming something that isn't Pete's fault on Pete? So no, I don't think he's our candidate. I'm going to go on to the court, the mysterious court. There's a great article. For those of you who watch this, you could get a tally of the 50 most important cases. So I said in my blog the other day what I believe to be the case is the press has overstated. The Supreme Court has been bizarre. And if there is a way for them to find that litigants against Trump's executive orders don't have standing, they'll find it. If there is a way to take a appellate court stay of a Trump action and remove the stay, they'll remove it, as they have proven. Is there a way, if there is a way to describe why they did it, that they can avoid, they'll avoid it. Simple orders, what Amy Coney Barrett says, it's the paragraph that gets the 5 or 6 votes that you have to have. And that's what those folks agree on. But as any constitutional law professor will tell you, it's just the start of the story. In most of these cases, there's been no litigation at all on the merits of the case. A comprehensive look at the case has not taken place. And in most of those cases, it's hard to believe that even the Supreme Court, as presently constituted, could find 5 votes to uphold Trump on most of these issues. So I'll give you the example the other day. What's happened recently, an appellate court has denied Trump's use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which gives us a chance to respond in an act of war, has denied its use again with regard to deportation of certain undocumented people. So that might eventually become before the Supremes, but one way or another, the stay will have to be. But Trump is not using this on a daily basis anymore. He's got lots of ways to try and deport people, and for the most part, they're trying to give them as little due process as they can, and to tell the court that they're giving them due process. The second case we just won was on tariffs. Yet again, it stayed. So the president, under the International Emergency Powers Act, never had the power to institute a tariff on Canada for the suitcase of fentanyl that gets across the Canadian border each year. The trade court has always felt that it's beyond the president's powers. And yet again, there's a stay that keeps Trump's tariffs in play while the matter is litigated. Federal troops in LA, a court just said it's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you can't put troops on the street to do law enforcement. Birthright citizenship, nothing's happening. Classes have been certified and the stay is holding. That is, the government is enjoined from denying rights of citizenship to people born here of immigrant parents or even parents of undocumented. So what's happening, and I think we can see it happening, is the longer these cases go, the more the court is faced with what happens after they lift injunctions that appellate courts have placed. So appellate courts decide whether to freeze the executive action. And in some of these cases, that's what they decided. They froze, for instance, in a couple cases, they made the government give away money, and then the Supreme Court stayed the order that required the federal government to give away the money. The court is slowing things down, but eventually, on some of these cases, the Supreme Court will have to rule, and on most of these cases, there's not a lot of argument in the constitutional community about whether the 1798 Act or the National Emergency Act on tariffs qualify, or even Posse Comitatus. The facts of the case are pretty good, and over time, more and more of these cases will be freed from stays, and the Trump executive branch will not be able to act. The issue is, which of these cases will Trump want to take before the Supremes? I think tariffs for sure, and birthright citizenship. But some of the others, they'll just stop arresting people with the National Guard, or they'll import people a different way. They're not going to get heard by the Supreme Court on all these cases. You could even argue that eventually the Supreme Court will not hear birthright citizenship, and they'll just affirm the lower court's decision. So it's the three things to remember. Sometimes there's a standing issue. In the case of people suing under the Budget and Impoundment Act to say that they should get the money that Trump illegally rescinded, the problem is it seems possible that the Budget and Impoundment Act only allows the General Accountability Office to file that lawsuit, and no one else has standing, not the aggrieved nonprofit that helps people from dying in Sierra Leone. So you have an initial standing issue in some of these cases. With regard to whether a stay should be lifted, the court makes a finding of this: are the litigants likely to succeed on the merits? In all these cases, the federal district courts and the appellate courts have found that our side is likely to succeed on its merits. Is there irreparable harm if something isn't stayed? If the court removes the stay and lets Trump continue, is there irreparable harm? The Supremes are not saying, but it must be the case that in some cases where the appellate court has felt irreparable harm, it's obvious that there aren't 5 votes on the Supremes to say that's irreparable harm. So they lift the stay because there's no finding of irreparable harm. There are other standards having to do with the balance of equities. So would something, were it not stayed, cause a huge imbalance between the aggrieved parties and the government for whom it's trivial. But the biggest things are likelihood of success on the merits and irreparable harm. The other thing to keep in mind about all these cases is there's an argument under Article 2 of the Constitution about the virtually unlimited executive branch powers of the president. So in that case, some of these firings and agency reorganizations would be upheld by Alito and Thomas for sure, and maybe by Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, on the theory that Congress has chipped away from the constitutionally protected executive branch powers of the president. So that'd be something like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, where the courts are going to rule that special congressional attention to the activities of that sort of a quasi-legislative executive branch agency is not possible under the Constitution. Where we run into the big dilemma, of course, is Federal Reserve, where Kavanaugh and Gorsuch have said in the past that the Federal Reserve is a different animal and that Trump does not have unitary executive powers to remove members of the Federal Reserve Board. So we'll see. It's problematic that this Democrat it's problematic that she claimed, if she did, prime residency for two houses. I wish that hadn't happened. But the argument would be that Trump does not have the power to, hi, Darlene, I didn't know you were out there, doesn't have the power to do that. We'll find out. So what we're remembering from this run-on sentence about the courts is those of us who have been dismayed about the relative unwillingness of the courts to stand in the way of the most clearly unconstitutional executive orders should continue to be dismayed. Amy Coney Barrett started strong with regard to due process, and since then, especially on federal funding cases, she's tried to find a way not to hurt the feelings of the executive branch. John Roberts voted with the three liberals on one of the big congressional funding cases, and he couldn't get Barrett with him. So that will be interesting. But those of us who think that this is going to be the way it is with the court for another 3 years are also wrong. As the comprehensive look at the cases happens, the cases that are still sitting there with appellate court rulings or district court rulings, the court will have to attend to the fact that the facts of the case are there. And most of those cases, the litigants are right on the constitutional protection. So people who follow the court are going to be happier a year now, at least in some of these cases, than they are now. And I'll stop there for a minute.
Okay, it is interesting to me how, as you said earlier, the court has been very deferential in allowing the administration to keep moving forward on its actions while the cases move forward and get appealed. And that has been frustrating. I wonder, I guess, I wonder why they're putting off the recognition that it looks like these people will win on the merits in the long run.
Well, I think because the benign explanation is they like to not intervene unless necessary in the operation of another branch of the government. So that would be you could apply that to legislative branch too. They're trying not, the executive branch said they were going to do something, and they're trying to use the utmost of discretion in whether they are going to intervene. So that would be the benign explanation. The other explanation would be they're all Bush, and 6 of them are Bush and Trump appointees. And Trump appointed the last 3, hoping that they would do exactly this. They were surprised because Amy Coney Barrett hasn't. And there have been a couple cases. New York Times does a great map of all this. There's been a couple cases where Kavanaugh and Gorsuch have disappointed Trump, but not many. So you could have a political explanation, and Roberts is dismayed at that. But it's Trump that politicizes it. He talks about it, his justices all the time. I think you'll find in the next year that they'll do 2 or 3 cases that really, really make him mad. Certainly, if he lets birthright citizenship go to the Supreme Court, that's going to be a 7-2 decision that his executive order violates constitutional right of people born in this country. There's no question about it.
Mhm, mhm.
Sheila.
Yes, please. This has to do with the Venezuelan folks that have been transported out of this country and sent back. I saw an interview with a young man who was just released. Are these folks being released one at a time, or what's happening with that?
There's a court order with regard to future Venezuelans, and there's court action with regard to temporary protected status. But I don't know anything special about people who have already been deported. Certainly, there's been no court order.
Well, the fellow
that there might be individual cases, but
go ahead. The fellow that I'm talking about was deported, was down there for umpty-umph months, how many months that was, and he's now back in the States.
And that's one, and that's it, I think. And that's the guy that they're trying to deport again. There is not
not Garcia. No, different guy. Different.
Okay. Well, at any rate, we know this. There is no broader court order on anything they have to do about anyone they have deported.
Okay.
And so we're ready to go on to politics, elections. So as I said in my blog, we're about to win back the Virginia governorship. That's nice. It's a big state. That's good. And we should hold on to New Jersey. Those are the 2 races up this fall. And as I said, every time there's a special election, we do better than we did in 2024. Let's touch on redistricting. I talked to my sweetie about this or not a lot, and she's convinced that since there are more Republican states that could redraw their lines than Democrats, that this is we're going to end up down 5 or 10, but we're not. That's the good news. So Greg Abbott did his -5. Gavin Newsom is going to succeed in his +5. You can read articles all you want about how Arnold Schwarzenegger is criticizing that, but that's right now is polling 50 to 34 or something. And it's the absurd thing, of course, is what Trump did is jettison California Republicans by doing this, and they made the threat clear, and they will be successful. So then what the media is saying is, yeah, but look at the other states that are acting. Missouri is calling a special session. Indiana is considering a special session. So it's so ridiculous as a narrative. The number of plus seats that they're seeking in Missouri is 1. And if they get it by reconfiguring St. Louis suburbs to try and beat Emmanuel Cleaver, they'll weaken their chances and make it possible, or at least conceivable, that we would win in another suburb. But even if they torch us In Missouri, their delegation goes from 5-2 to 6-1. In Indiana, they are also fighting over one seat. That's all it is. And the governor doesn't want to do it. He might end up doing it because Trump may turn the screws on him. But thinking that this is going to sweep the country, it's good enough that we have Illinois and New York saying, well, if you do something, we'll do something. We will be able to keep this within its bounds. And remember that turnout in such as in Texas, where they have all new congressmen in some districts, that depresses turnout. So in anything that's close to a swing district, that could be advantageous. At any rate, the news is good. Our generic number for the congressional vote is around 3 or 4%. We should take back 15 seats. Trump is trying to change the number of seats that are swingable. That's a big disappointment in America. We should have 80 swing seats. We took back 60 seats in 1964 when Goldwater ran. We should have that. Republicans took back 30 some, maybe 40 after we passed Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. It should be possible to have that kind of swing, but obviously we'd be happy with 15 or 20 and we'll get it. So that leads us to close our thoughts today with the issue of whether we have any chance in the Senate, which we talked about last month. It's interesting. In the olden days, when Tom Harkin was senator from Iowa, the idea that Joni Ernst isn't going to run again would raise some eyebrows. Really don't see us doing anything but spending a massive amount of money in Iowa and losing to whatever Republican gets nominated. If I'm right about that, then the only way we could get to 4 is keep John Ossoff from getting beat in Georgia and winning these 4 races. Number 1, easiest of all, Roy Cooper is running in North Carolina. Tom Tillis is not running. It'll be a winger that Roy Cooper runs against. We have a good chance of winning. Certainly, especially if inflation picks up a little bit, or we give away a 1/6 of Ukraine or some other thing, ideas that Trump has. So we have a great shot in North Carolina. We have a good shot in Maine. We thought we did 6 years ago. We ran the Speaker of the House against Susan Collins. Susan Collins sold, who she wants to be, which is this moderate voice in the middle. But boy, has she delivered for Trump so many times. Right now, there's several people jumping in, but the big issue is whether Governor Janet Mills who's considering it, will take on Susan Collins directly. And you can bet that Schumer's visited with Janet Mills more than once on that, and that the National Democrats will finance that big time and try and pick off that seat. Even if it didn't get us to 50 or 51, because there's fluidity in Murkowski's votes. And at the very least, if you got close, Murkowski could use that as a bargaining chip. Third race, so Schumer already did take Sherrod Brown to lunch, and Sherrod Brown is running in Ohio. That too depends on how things look in November. If it looks like that's now 14 months from now, if it looks like Trump's done a lot of things, if his popularity falls a little bit more, then who knows? But he's running against a quasi incumbent, John Husted, who was appointed, and even that is sort of incumbency. So it gives him some advantages in early polls. Sherrod Brown's running maybe 6 points behind, but it's certainly a race that we could win, and that would still leave us probably one short. But this is the hope, and I mentioned it before, and that is that John Cornyn will lose to Ken Paxton in the Texas senatorial primary next year, giving Colin Allred, former congressman, former linebacker, a chance to win. not every Democrat is thrilled by the way Colin Allred ran last time against Cruz, yes. But that doesn't mean he can't win, and he would be our fourth. And that very much depends on Paxton, who's maniacal, beating Cornyn, who's MAGA but less maniacal. And if that happens, it opens up some votes in the center. And that's the way it is right now, I think. Questions, thoughts, concerns on the elections. Off-year elections are great for the party not in power, and we're certainly not in power. Last I checked, I think it's fair to say that we're not in power, the Democrats.
Yes, I think that is fair. You mentioned Janet Mills and Maine. There's a lot of progressive talk about Graham Plattner getting a lot of energy. That's the sort of example I was talking about before, about potentials for divisions based on frustration with people not like Schumer and Jeffries not throwing a tantrum against Trump.
Well, I think, I read his stuff today, and I think he's a good, solid, progressive candidate. This is what I think. Janet Mills, there are Democratic governors. Whitmer has played with Trump more than I would have wanted. Janet Mills is not one of those governors. Janet Mills has looked him in the eye, even at a National Governors Association meeting. And so it would be hard for the progressives to, I don't know what else is on Janet Mills's record that progressives wouldn't like. I would say that she's not as vulnerable to the kind of thing that has happened in Seattle with Bruce Harrell being in trouble. I think Janet Mills, what would happen if there was a strong progressive versus liberal primary is whoever wins would close ranks with whoever loses. The progressives, are not going to vote for Susan Collins. So I think that there's closing of ranks, and I think for the most part, it's all about there's two ways to get more votes: get more progressives to vote, or people who haven't been voting, or get more people who are kind of sort of to the center of the Democrats to vote for your candidate, or get independents. Awful lot of independents in Maine. Angus King, the other senator, is an independent. So, I'm a softie. I'll run a liberal if I get a better chance of winning. On the other hand, I think it's very good for the party to have the full range of ideas expressed. I do think that's a lot of senators where it's kind of hard to tell just where they are on that continuum. But anyway, and answer your question, I think if Janet Mills is in and this other guy runs a strong campaign, just whoever loses will close ranks.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there then. I want to thank you as always. Yeah, let's I'll point out that you did mention it a couple times. Your blog recently updated, ourunfinishedwork.blogspot.com, and you're the founder and we're the executive director. You were the director, I guess, of Northwest Policy Center at the University of Washington. You bring a whole history of political understanding and working with politicians. So we really appreciate the insight every month that you give us.
Glad to do it.
And we'll see you next month.
Discussion of the legislature turned into a run-on sentence, but we'll try and find those periods at the end of sentences next time we're here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.